Hello and welcome to In the Court of the Wenton Knave. We are continuing our journey through King Crimsonness. It's not just King Crimson, it's King Crimson related. Remember, I did do Giles and Fripp, and I did do McDonald's and Giles, so it makes sense. In the wilderness years of King Crimson, I do Exposure. I think that's the cover. I don't think that's the cover. That's kind of a good cover. I mean, I've said before, I'm not a fan of pictures of band members on covers of albums. That's actually kind of quite a good album cover, I think. Whereas that kind of isn't. It's just a picture of someone. Interestingly, I didn't hear this for many years. Why I never picked it up, I don't really know. It's just one of those things, and it wasn't until DGM got hold of it to release it that I got it. And I don't think they had it for a while. Where we left off with Red, one of the most defining moments in King Crimson. Very important album in rock in general. The time was over for dinosaur bands. Fripp enrolled in the International Academy of Continuous Education, which was the J.G. Bennett thing. And obviously I'm not going to go into that because I'll just, to try and do that, it's kind of, it would be a bit like doing Tales from Topographic Oceans, wouldn't it? In that I don't know about it, but it's psychology and spirituality meeting. So it's someone with a sciencey background doing a spiritual thing, kind of the hippie thing, if you like. It's where Jamie Muir went, and for whatever reason, as Fripp lost hope with King Crimson, I believe there was a particular gig where the promoters having to negotiate with the manager about how many people are in the hall, and it's a scam basically, where Fripp says that's where he lost hope with concerts, with rock music, whatever it was, and went off and became a monk, if you like. After that, he went to New York, to the what's known as Hell's Kitchen area of New York, where there was a lot of cool stuff happening. It was the Talking Heads era, that kind of stuff was happening. And he talked about, he wanted to investigate the pop song as a means of expression. That's the purpose of it, pop song. Which really means back to basics, I think. I mean, one back to basics would have been to go back to classical music, which I couldn't see that happening. He did once say, that you could say more with one note of rock music than the whole classical repertoire. But this is another way of going back to basics, which is making simplicity. There's a discipline, he said, interesting use of that word, in 3 or 4 minutes, words of one syllable, saying what you want to say emotionally. And that's right. That's why pop music's good, sometimes. Not always. Sometimes it's awful. So yeah, in the midst of punk, I think, depending on who you read, the thing about reading about music, obviously, as Zappa said, is that the people writing about it aren't really worth listening to, and you've got to listen to the music. The music is the real document, because the people writing about it didn't know what they were talking about. But some of the people will talk about what Fripp was doing and what was really happening with the music, and some people will talk about punk and say Fripp cast aside the blah 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 and went to punk, which in some senses is true. In that obviously it's the back to basics, like he said. But the punk scam, which they said it was, the Sex Pistols and all that stuff, that was something happening in London. That's not the same as what was happening in New York at all. Is there really a stylistic link between Talking Heads and Sex Pistols? No, they're just two different bands. And so much of it was marketing, because it was at that time when it was all about taking control, the industry taking control of bands and marketing things into boxes and all that stuff. It was just more bands. The Stranglers. Are the Stranglers a punk band? Why are they a punk band? Motorhead. Are Motorhead heavy rock or are they punk? What's the difference? Oh, they've got long hair. I do think, that for the first time London wasn't the centre of creativity in what was happening in modern Western music, which it was up to that point, and now it wasn't. And what was happening in New York was much better, I think, personally. Not that there weren't great bands in the UK, but like I said, it's not relevant. They're just bands. They're just some bands. At some point during this period, a Red reunion was offered by some management. Fripp declined. What came out of that was UK. I'm not going to do UK here. I think we will do UK one day in Court of the Wenton King, actually. The first UK album. And they got Eddie Jobson and they got Alan Holdsworth effectively to replace Fripp, which was something that didn't last, but which for me is something different, something else, which is fantastic. Fripp does say that first UK album that's what King Crimson is like without Fripp. And it's a brilliant album, that first album. Not very well recorded, but some fantastic songs. Early on in this period, he played on the first Peter Gabriel album. He didn't produce it, because I know Bob Ezrin produced the first one. And he talks about, for the first time I think, he started talking about the small independent and mobile unit The idea is that you can go around and play on different things. That's what makes a good musician. You know, jazz musicians do this, isn't they? Trying to play with different people, and the more different people you play with, the better musician you are. Unlike the problem of rock, the marketing behind it, of the heroes who play together forever, as I already said before, and they basically just get worse and die slowly. And I do think, from Fripp's perspective, he's looking at musicians, playing with musicians, and obviously they're all happy to play with him because he brings something completely out of the box to the table that they're not expecting, and obviously that's a great thing to have, to say, oh, let's get this guy in to play a solo. Oh my god. New Wave fans might have a problem, obviously, because things have become much more fashion based, or certainly since the early 60s, probably more than ever, in that things are being controlled by the industry and the journalists are following suit, and etc., and everything's been pigeonholed and all that stuff. So as a small independent mobile unit, he was offered to replace Steve Hackett, said no. Was offered to play on Gabriel's album, said yes. Was offered to play with Greg Lake, said no. There's a bit of a story behind that. I won't go too much into it, but basically Fripp went to see the huge juggernaut of ELP in '77. I can't imagine what he thought of that. But was spotted in the crowd or just at the side or something, and Greg Lake said, well, get him backstage and look after him and all this stuff, and then they went out for dinner. And there's a bit of conflicting story about what happened next, but basically Fripp said no. He doesn't want to play with Lake, and I maybe Lake was thinking, well, creatively ELP is finished, let's do that instead. He was offered David Bowie, Heroes, obviously, and if you're willing to take a chance, you know, that's what he said, and they said yes, and that's fantastic. Some fantastic, supposedly spontaneous playing on there. I don't know whether I believe what's actually on the record is spontaneous, but it was more they played it to him and he just did it, and they were very impressed. And obviously he didn't do the tour, so Adrian Belew did the tour, poached from Zappa. More on that later. He was offered to play on Blondie, and he said yes, and that's some good playing on it. And he was offered to produce and play on a Daryl Hall album, which ended up not being released for 2 years. He talked about at this point of different divisions in the music industry: the first division, second division, and third division. So third division, you can play the music you want to play, but you're going to struggle to make a living out of it, and it's going to be a struggle. There's the second division, which was kind of what he was doing, where he was visible, but he's not the big band playing. And obviously King Crimson will be the first division, where he has that freedom. What came out of all of this was a plan, really, which he called the Drive to 1981. That was originally supposed to involve 3 albums. It ended up involving several things, and some things were released, but 3 albums. One was Peter Gabriel 2, where he actually produced the album and played on it, and there's some fantastic playing on there as well, some very typical Fripp playing and some less typical Fripp playing. The Daryl Hall solo album, and his solo album, Exposure. And originally he had Daryl Hall on vocals on a couple of songs, and it was vetoed and was told by record company suits that, oh no, you don't deserve to have your name on a record. It'll have to be a Daryl Hall Fripp album, even though it's Fripp's album, and and Daryl Hall's solo album wasn't released because they were worried that the uncoolness of the Frippness would hurt his career. Controversial there. But yeah, instead of Daryl Hall being on it, he got Peter Hamill. Yes. Hell yes. And someone called Terry Roche. He also released this stuff of Frippatronics and Discotronics, which was like kind of dancey stuff, and that became the League of Gentlemen. Not that League of Gentlemen, a different League of Gentlemen. Not the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen either, a different League of Gentlemen altogether. And there's some really cool stuff actually with that band. To hear the Frippisms in that different environment is great fun. What came out of that was the Gameland thing, I think, and a thing called Trap. So yeah, I've skimmed over a huge amount of information there, but I'm not going to do a massive review on this. I mean, it isn't even a King Crimson album. I'm not saying this is King Crimson, by the way. It's just part of the story, and it's interesting, just like we did McDonald's and Giles, etc. I'm doing the third version. There's 3 versions of it. So I'm going to talk about the third version for completely arbitrary reasons. I've just decided it's actually disc 2 of this nice DGM double disc version, if I can find the tracks. Track 1 is the Preface. That's Peter Gabriel talking on that bit. Part of this album is that they're talking about this story of how there's going to be a big flood. It was during King Crimson where Fripp was talking about the oncoming Armageddon. And I think people genuinely believed that the world was coming to an end. I think it's a natural thing at any point in time. Where it's also a middle-aged thing. As you reach middle age as well, it feels like everything happening in the world is accelerating to a point it's all going to finish, and people have thought that for thousands of years actually, it's just natural. But in this particular case there was a story of global floods actually, which never happened obviously, and that's talked about here, so I'll talk about that in a bit. The second track is You Burn Me Up, I'm a Cigarette, and straight away you're into something nothing like King Crimson, which is great. Mad shouty song is the best way to put it. Definitely fits in with the new wavy New York era, that kind of stuff. I can't help but think needs more Baloo. It is a Fripp Hall composition. It's good, it's really good, really shouty though. Track 3 is Breathless. It does make you breathless. It's almost red. It's red with widdly Frippatronic things going on as well, so that's really good. Disengage #2. The previous version of the album has Disengage #1 at this point. Disengage #2, it's more of the talking intro stuff, but now with sort of shouty, thrashy riffs, like Burn Me Up, that kind of thing. And you realise, I think, something was found on Red. It wasn't just things found on Larks and Schizoid Man. Something was found on Red which is now familiar, is a frippiness, of that heavy riffiness. And here it is, it's brilliant. Track 5, North Star, it's a ballad. Dare I say, how do you describe a ballad? I think Billy Joelish, there's a bit of that in there, but with this shouty edginess, New York, late 70s-ness. And then track 6 is Chicago, and that's an actual ballad, and it's very nice. Track 7 is New York, New York, New York, which is a twist on that concept, but actually a little bit Bruford solo, or UK maybe. It's kind of fusiony. Not what you'd associate with Fripp actually, so that's interesting. But he's in New York, he's not in Europe. Track 8 is Mary, which is great. Female vocals, very nice ballad. Then we have Exposure, the title track, which we know from Peter Gabriel 2 as well. This is the version without Peter Gabriel shouting Exposure over the top of it, and you've got the female vocalist doing it on here, and some talking on there as well. I think it's better than the PG2 version. I wonder if that's controversial. Maybe it is. Maybe the next thing I'm going to say later on is even more controversial. Track 10 is Hååden Two. Interesting, he's doing something very European sounding. As well as interesting that David Bowie was supposed to be over the other side of the pond doing the opposite. It's the evil arpeggio thing. Fripp talking about stuff. And then we've got track 11, which is Urban Landscape. That's a bit of Frippatronics. Easy to call those soundscapes, but it's Frippatronics still at this point. They're only soundscapes. Track 12 is I May Not Have Had Enough of Me, but I Have Had Enough of You. And it's another shouty song, very welcome at that point in the album. Like Burn Me Up, that kind of thing. I like the title. Of course it starts with the Larks theme as well, so that's also good. Track 13, first inaugural address to the I.A.C.E. Sherborne House. That's the J.G. Bennett thing. Is it? I'm not sure what it is, but there it is. Just that sounds like a load of static to me. I don't know what that means. But yeah, track 14 is Water Music 1. This is some nice Frippatronics, which goes around, is really part of Here Comes the Flood. Now this may be really controversial, I don't really know, but I think this is the best version of Here Comes the Flood. It is Gabriel on there, but it's just him and a piano. And then we have Water Music 2 as the other side of that. And because it's water music, because we think there's this flood coming that's going to take over the world. And then we have the Postscript, where it's revealed, actually, that story about the flood coming, it was nonsense. It was made up, never mind. But it's really nice, I really like the way that works. It's a pretty good album. And it's good, it's refreshing because it's different. It's not like anything else really. It's not like League of Gentlemen, it's not like Lead Crusher Guitarist, it's not like the Soundscape stuff, it's not like King Crimson. It's just different stuff. There's only one of them as well, so that's interesting. That's good. And I will see you next week for more King Crimson in the guise of Discipline.